A whole pile of documents released by the federal government to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health has me more than a little worried. As I explain in a couple of pieces up at the Toronto Sun website right now, these documents show a government that was slow to react, a government that was not taking the threat of this virus seriously, and one that was giving different information to its own people than they were to the general public. For example, the documents show that as of January 28th, the federal government had warned all of its employees, do not travel to Hubei, China. That's the province that Wuhan is at the center of. This is the epicenter of the outbreak. So federal government employees, including those on missions in China at the embassy, not allowed to go to Hubei province. That's January 28th. This memo from February 10th shows that the federal government is still pondering, what kind of travel restrictions, what type of screening, what type of self-isolation measures should be needed for people coming to Canada from Hubei. Now, you will recall at that time, we were repatriating Canadians who had been stuck in China. They were flown back to CFB Trenton or to the NAV Centre in Cornwall, Ontario. They were put into quarantine for 14 days, and yet at the same time, at least 70 people a day, roughly, were coming back to Canada from Hubei. Now, here is what the documents actually say on the difference between those arriving on commercial flights and those being repatriated. There is a need to maintain public trust in Canada's response to the coronavirus. Currently, there are perceived differences between advice to travelers from Hubei province on commercial flights and planned measures for repatriation from Wuhan, China. No kidding. One has to go into absolute quarantine on an army base or at a government facility and be threatened with arrest if they leave, and the rest are free to go. They're told to self-isolate, thankfully, by this point, but it took far too long for them to get there. And why the difference? Why not tell them you're under quarantine at home? They were worried that they didn't have the manpower to enforce such an order. They were worried that they'd be stretched too thin. So they went for just go home and self-isolate. Another problematic piece in this is something that I've been talking about for the past few days, and that is the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. This is supposed to be the stockpile of, everything from antiviral drugs to blankets, beds to personal protective equipment that the federal government has on hand for when the provinces need it. That part of the emergency stockpile, the personal protective equipment, was set up after SARS. It's supposed to be in 11 different warehouses, one in Ottawa, 10 across the country, and yet, as this memo shows, they knew that they were low and having difficulty getting supplies as early as February the 10th. That, ladies and gentlemen, is problematic. We knew about it months ago, and only are we acting in a major way at this point as supplies in some parts of the country have dwindled. Look, I know that this is an evolving situation. I know that this is a virus like we haven't dealt with in anyone's memory. Yet, the government saw some of the writing on the wall. They chose not to act, though. These memos show a government that's cautious, that is plotting, that is slow. That is not what we needed in this time. It's not like they weren't warned by other medical professionals, by journalists, by columnists like myself. And yet they just kept saying, Canada is at a low risk. We have everything under control, when the truth is, they absolutely did not.